Hello everybody, I'm Taylor and this is my YouTube channel. I am more than grateful for all my subscribers, and if you just found this channel, you're in the right place. Here I share my personal experience, strength, and hope. I share the tools and the resources and the things that I've done and that I still do today that help me get through life sober, and not just sober, but happy. It's been a while since I've made a video, and it's because I've had a lot to process. I've had a lot going on in my life. So this video I'm making is speaking from my heart. You know, I've realized lately that it doesn't matter if I'm working an honest program, if I'm, you know, doing all this inner work, I'm being nice and loving to people, I'm doing service work, like I'm doing all these things right that make up why my recovery's working. And I realized that I can't control other people and their behaviors and their actions and their attitudes. But I do have control over my reaction to them. And before recovery, I would allow other people's reactions and how they thought about me or how they felt about me. I would take that on as part as my identity, and it would make me feel like I wasn't good enough. And I've gotten to a point in recovery where I'm able to separate who I was from where I am now, from what other people may think about me. And I'll use this as an example. I recently had a situation, a very painful situation, where one of my daughters and a family member intentionally betrayed me, was intentionally dishonest. And they both did some very intentionally painful things out of their own selfish motives. And the pain that I felt due to their actions was unbearable. And I know that if I hadn't had a solid foundation in recovery, if I wasn't as spiritually and emotionally connected to myself as I am, I would have lost it. I would have slipped back into my old patterns, behaviors, and attitudes. You know, I grew up in active addiction. My main coping mechanism my entire life was anger and violence. My entire life, if somebody did something to me, I was doing something back no matter what. It's like, you're gonna hurt me, I'll show you, I'm gonna hurt you 10 times harder. And that was the mentality I had growing up. And so I say this because when the situation happened, I was so hurt, beyond hurt. Words can't even describe the pain that I felt within my heart, within my body. And the first thing I did when I found it out is I walked outside alone by myself. I picked up my phone and I hit the voice recording app on my phone. And I said, and I let loose, and I vented, I screamed, whatever I wanted to say to my daughter, whatever I wanted to say to the family member, I set it into my voice recorder app. And I just kept speaking and speaking and speaking. I must have spoken for 20 to 30 minutes, and I'm not kidding, because that's what I needed to do to get those emotions, those thoughts in my head, to get them out of my head. See, I don't always have to pick up the phone and talk to someone else like that, because nobody really wants to listen to me vent the way I was venting alone with myself. And honestly, I don't want people to see that side of me, right? I was so hurt. And when I first got into recovery in 12-step programs, when any little type of pain would happen, I would instantly pick up the phone. I did not know how to sit with pain. I feared pain. I was scared of pain. I would fight against pain. I did not want to feel pain. 15 years of emotions within myself that I had shoved down, that had been unaddressed my entire life, came completely out of me when I first got sober. And so I've been sober for several years before this situation I'm talking about had happened, and I've also been in recovery for about 3. So I had a solid foundation. I had built coping mechanisms and had them stabilized. I had a support system. I had a daily recovery schedule. I meditate. I self-reflect. So I had a foundation when this painful experience happened. I can't sit here and say what would have happened if I didn't have this foundation. I know what the old Taylor would have done. I can sit here and think back of what I would have done if I didn't have a program, if I didn't have a solution, and if I didn't have that foundation. But the point is that since I've been in recovery, I've had to find ways for me that work for me to get my emotions out of my body, out of my mind, and out of my mouth. Because I know for me, if I sat there, say when the situation happens and I hit my voice recorder on my phone and I started venting in my phone, what if I wouldn't have picked up the phone and done that? What if I would have just sat with those painful emotions, with them just brewing inside my head, just brewing and ruminating and obsessing? I would have just kept feeding the fire. Every tiny little thing would have kept pissing me off, and it would have kept piling up. And things like that for me are very dangerous, because if I don't address my pain as it arises, it piles up and it piles up. And the old version of myself would explode. Or if I didn't explode when I was in active addiction, I would numb out because I didn't want to feel the pain. But the thing is that I would drink to numb my pain, but yet my pain was still there. It was still there within me. I was just unaware that it was there because I was intoxicated. But it was still there. Because the only way to resolve pain is to face pain, is to feel pain. And a person cannot properly address pain and process pain if they have chemicals in their body. It's impossible. A person must be completely sober to process emotions in a healthy, productive way. Even smoking pot. If a person's smoking pot, it's impossible for them to process their emotions because they're still loaded. They're still blocking themselves from themselves. They're blocking themselves from their heart and from their head. So any substance in general a person takes, they cannot thoroughly process their emotions. So as I'm venting into this phone, right? I'm outside in my backyard as I'm doing it. I'm sure neighbors heard me because I was pissed and I didn't care. And I could feel, as time was going by, I could feel the intensity of my emotions going down and down and down and down and down. You would hope so after 20 to 30 minutes later, venting, right? But the point is that they were decreasing. And that's the goal for me, is to decrease the intensity of my emotions. And so I finally was done venting, and I stopped it. And I don't think I've ever went back to listen to things like that when I'm venting, because I don't think that's a good thing for me to do when I'm angry like that, because it can bring up a lot of emotions, and because of this situation, it's been several months since the event has happened. And there has been times where I've had to sit in silence, and I've had to allow myself to feel the pain. And I've had to cry, and I've had to grieve over my daughter. I've had to grieve over this family member. I've had to grieve over people who are still alive. And that's a painful thing to have to do. And what recovery has shown me, it's shown me something within myself. I'll have to say it's given me the power within myself to see my worth, to see that just because somebody makes the choices that they choose to make, it's not a reflection on my self-worth. Recovery's taught me not to measure my own self-worth off over another person's inability to be honest, another person's inability to process their own pain, another person's inability to be loving, compassionate, and kind, and tolerant, right? I'm not responsible for that. Would it be nice to have a relationship with this family member, a healthy relationship? Of course it would be, right? Because when a person thinks of family, they think of unity. A family is supposed to be loving, kind, honest, and trustworthy. That's not the type of family I grew up in. And I had to grieve that. I had to grieve the family I would never have. And until I gave myself permission to grieve and cry and accept and let go and realize that it's not because of me. It's because they're stuck in their own dysfunction. They're stuck in their own pain. And it has nothing to do with who I am or what I bring to the table. That's their problem. And it took me 25 years to finally get to that point. Is it painful? Yes. I'm not saying the things I talk about, I'm not saying it makes the pain go away. But the way I look at the pain, the way I face the pain, and the way I process the pain has changed. You know, I did a lot of 12-step meetings in the beginning of my recovery, and I would always hear repetitively, which is stuck in my head because of it, is that your perspective determines everything. Your perspective and your attitude determines everything. And that's so true. I can wake up in the morning and I can say, fuck, today's gonna be a shitty day. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Blah, blah, blah. And I can wake up with that negativity. Or I can wake up and I can express gratitude for being alive. I can express gratitude for being where I am today compared to where I've been in the past. It's perspective. It's a change in thought. I might not have control over my first thought, but I do over the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. And see, the thing about emotions, for me at least, is that I know there's always a time and a place to where I can sit with myself in silence to process my emotions. I haven't got to a point in my recovery yet, and I probably never will, because, you know, of where I can sit with somebody and cry with them. I've cried with people over the phone, and that's only been like 2, 3. My entire time in recovery, I've been able to actually cry with somebody, but I never had that before recovery. I don't like to cry in front of people at all. I feel very weird. I feel very weak, honestly, because I grew up in a home where crying was perceived as weak. Tough it up, suck it up. Or when I would try to talk about my emotions, I was too sensitive. Or I was being dramatic. I was over-exaggerating. It was always dismissive behaviors. So at a very young age, I learned to keep that shit in. And what happens when a child learns to keep the emotions in, it brews to anger. And that's why anger became my main coping mechanism. And people that have hurt me, I realize that people are spiritually sick. They're blocked from themselves because of this world. They're so distracted by worldly things. They're so distracted by everyone else and everything else, whatever they're distracted by, because it's easier for them to be distracted than it is to put attention to themselves, for them to take an honest look at themselves, because it's painful. It's very painful for a person to look in the mirror and to become self-aware of their actions, behaviors, and attitudes. That is painful. And that is the most painfulest step in recovery, is taking an honest look at oneself. The guilt, the shame, the resentment, the embarrassment, whatever other emotions the individual may feel. And if we aren't taught how to deal with this pain in a healthy way, then we can't process it. And so the situation with my daughter and the situation with my family member taught me a lot about myself and just how far I've came in my recovery, in my spirituality, just in my overall growth in general, and it's hard because that is my daughter, but at the same time, she is a human being. I look at my children as their own entities, right? They're their own souls, whatever a person wants to call it. They're their own human being. And I'm not going to jeopardize my emotional sobriety for someone who has no respect for me, for someone who is dishonest, for someone who is in active addiction, for someone who doesn't want to respect me or my household. I'm not going to waste my time and energy on someone like that. Whenever they want to be honest, whenever they want to respect the boundaries, which are very simple. I don't have that many boundaries, which is don't lie to me, don't disrespect me, and don't intentionally hurt me. Those are my 3 boundaries that I don't care, family, daughter, husband, whoever. If a person's willing to cross one boundary, especially the lying part, if a person is willing to lie to me, they're willing to lie again and again and again and again. And it doesn't matter if they're sorry and this and that, and they talk a good game and this and that. If they'll do it once, they'll do it again. See, for a person to really, people can say all day long and they can tell you their plans about changing and this and that, but if you don't see the action behind the words, there's nothing there. And that's the most important thing, is observing people and seeing the action behind the words. Is there action? Are they being honest? Are they open-minded? Are they willing? And are they taking action? Are they actually doing what they say they're doing? So it's those simple principles that I live by in my life when I meet people, when I work with people, when I deal with people. It's those little things that have saved me from a lot of emotional pain. And so it's important for me to speak my truth. It's important for me to share my personal experiences, because I've realized that nothing lasts forever. Everything is impermanent. It always changes. And I can either go with the flow, or I can fight against something that I have no control over, which takes a lot of energy. And I always like to use this analogy. I'm not religious, but the analogy with the devil on one side of the shoulder and the angel on the other. And the side the devil on is, in AA they call it the diseased mind, but I like to call it the negative mind, which is the trauma, the guilt, the shame, the dysfunction, the anger, the sadness, all the things we don't want to feel, right? And on the right side, where the angel sits, is the peace, the love, the compassion, the authenticity, the honesty, the willingness, the action, all the things we're working towards developing, the assets. And the more I fed my positive mind, the more the negative mind stopped telling me what to do. The more the negative mind held less and less power over my thought process. In 12-step programs, the first step is we admitted we were powerless over blank, that our lives had become unmanageable. And they talk a lot about surrender. They talk a lot about surrendering to a higher power. And see, the thing about these 12-step programs is that it's not about the program, it's about the person who's willing to work the program. Because there's a lot of things that I had to tweak and change in my brain with the vocabulary and things like that to make my program work. And so it's those things that I realized when it comes to surrendering to a higher power, that never felt right with me. because I had to surrender to the part of my brain that told me I can't, I won't, and I never will be. I had to surrender to my diseased mind. I had to surrender to the pain that I was carrying around. And I had to stop fighting a war in my head that I could never win. And that's what surrender looked like to me. And when I truly surrendered to that part of me, surrendered to the broken part of me, and was willing to take action to fill the positive mind with whatever I could fill it with, not just 12-step programs, with anything that had to do with healing, spirituality, anything that would help me grow. I had to emerge myself, and I had to make healing my new addiction until I could find balance. And that's what I had to do to make my recovery work. And now I have balance today. So who we are in the beginning of recovery is not who we will have to be the rest of our lives. And I had to start talking to myself a lot nicer. I had to show up for me the way nobody has ever showed up for me my entire life. You know, for example, I'll use this. Say, I can't do something, right? Say my brain's like, oh, you can't do that, right? I'm sure we all have those thoughts. And I had to develop enough self-awareness to be able to catch that part of my brain. And I say out loud, I can do that. I will do that. Watch me do that. So I had to start talking back to that part of my brain. And when I did, it started losing a lot of power. And so the main point of this video is that there will always be painful experiences, no matter how good a person's doing in their recovery, no matter how happy they are. We have no control over anybody else except ourselves. But we can either surrender to the pain, or we can fight against the pain, because I'm telling you, fighting against the pain led me nowhere except into brokenness. So once I learned, if I surrender to this pain and I accept this pain and I take action to use my tools to cope with it, to navigate it, and to process it, and to let it go, the pain will fade. The pain will fade, because this world that I live in, that we all live in, everything we do on earth is important. And I don't know why. I don't know what the point is. I just know there is a point, or we wouldn't be here, right? But we're not going to take anything that we've done on this earth when we descend and we pass away. So I make the best of what I can do every single day by doing the next right thing, by keeping and maintaining my daily recovery schedule, no matter how I feel physically, mentally, or emotionally, because that's what I have to do to keep my inner peace, my gratitude, my happiness, the love I've developed for myself. Words can't even explain the power I feel by being who I am today and where I am today, because I am confident in my relationship that I have developed with myself. And that is the main thing I was lacking my entire life, was a connection to myself. And so I share my truth with people in hopes that it can help someone else, because I know what it's like. Every single day I am faced with triggers. Every single day I am faced with a lot of different things. But the difference is in how I view these things and the action I take to help me get through them and overcome them and process them. So if you got anything out this video, you can subscribe. I don't care if you don't. I care if you do. You know, this channel's from my heart, and I just want to be able to guide people towards reaching within themselves, because I had to learn. I had to start believing in myself, because nobody was going to come and save me. Nobody. I had to stop depending on other people and things to make me feel loved, wanted, and needed. And I had to start giving myself those things. I had to show up for myself. May you find peace within yourself as I have.